Natalie Gertz-Young is our official, one of the presenters and the host. So make sure we are recording.
We should be recording. Let me double check. Yes, we are recording.
Okay, it looks like we are. Awesome. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, Gail.
Hi. All right. Well, welcome everyone to Wicked Weeds. It is our first Woodland Wednesdays of 2021. Woohoo! We are so excited to be back and to be offering these workshop series throughout the year in whatever capacity we can. And I really am grateful to our partners and hosts and presenters for making this possible so that we can bring it on back. So again, my name is Gail Prunty with Geauga Soil and Water Conservation District. And joining us tonight is Jonathan Mock with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. He's a district conservationist and basically the mastermind, the godfather of the Woodland Wednesdays programs. And we also have our knowledgeable and exciting presenters, Natalie Gertz-Young. She's the Education and Information Coordinator with Lake Soil and Water Conservation District. And also Joel Firem. He is the consulting forester with Firem Forestry Consulting. So thank you, speakers, for being willing to join us and share your knowledge and also be partners in the Woodland Wednesday series. So a quick review. As you know, that you probably noticed that everyone is muted and also our cameras are off. That's just because of the numbers of folks that are joining us in the program tonight, just to reduce distractions and to help things go smoothly. But if you do have a question, we're going to have designated question times. They're completely encouraged. We want you to just try your best to still ask whatever you need to. Natalie and Joel have created some designated question times in the presentation, as well as we have a pretty decent chunk of time at the end of the program where we will be taking questions as well. You'll also receive our contact information and additional resources. So maybe you don't have a question tonight, but you'll have a question when you go out to your yard and try to look at plants or things. So always please reach out and know that we are a resource here for you. So I hope everyone, if you don't know how to ask a question with the chat box, just go to the bottom of your screen and you see the little icon that says chat and click on that. And then you can type your question and hit enter or return, and it should work for you. So we'll be able to try to get your questions answered throughout. Okay, again, this is being recorded, so we will at the end of this program, we will send you it'll probably be tomorrow, but we'll send you a link to the program. We'll send you additional resources, and we'll send you information on our next Woodland Wednesdays program, which is going to be February 17th. So mark your calendars for that. Very exciting. Also, in addition, you will receive a small, very short survey, maybe 7 questions for feedback at the end of the program. So when you get that, take the time to fill it out, give us your thoughts, other topics that you might be interested in. And if you do so by January 22nd, I believe, then you will have a chance to win 1 free consultation with Joel from Firem Forestry Consultants. So he was generous enough to say, yeah, I'll go to someone's site and provide some identification and information for them. Some restrictions may apply, but just know that that is an exciting door prize for the program. Okay, I am almost finished. The last thing I want to do is, what would a welcome be without a few jokes? So I'm going to start by asking, and this is a time for you to practice using your chat. How did the homeowner feel when cutting down an invasive vine that attracted lots of birds? Anyone? How did the homeowner feel when she had to cut down an invasive vine that attracted a lot of the birds that she loved? Anyone using the chat? Any guesses? Conflicted? Good. Actually, she felt bittersweet. Okay, so these jokes are going to be, if you don't get them now, you'll get them after the program because they're all involving plants that we're going to talk about. What inspired Moses to remove invasive plants from his yard? Itchy? Maybe that was for the first joke, I don't know. But actually what inspired him was when he saw the burning bush. Oh, okay, finally, what's one New Year's resolution that applies to invasive plants? Wait for it, wait for it. Cut your calories. Calorie pairs, that is. All right, my friends, now without further ado, after that painful start, I'm so pleased and grateful to welcome Natalie Gertz-Young and Joel Firem, our presenters. So take it away, guys. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Gail. Those were some spectacular nerdy plant jokes. I am always all about those. So throughout this presentation, Joel and I are going to be flipping back and forth. So bear with us if that, seems a little weird, but we're going to be flipping back and forth. So we're here tonight to talk about invasive plants. Particularly, we're really going to be focusing on woody plants, especially those ones that you can identify right now in your yard, and maybe you could even start to manage right now in your yard. But if we're going to talk about invasive plants, one of the first things that you need to know is what is an invasive plant, right? So let's see here. Okay, so invasive plants 101. So there is a specific definition for an invasive plant. So I hear a lot of people say, oh, well, that plant's invasive. And they're talking about a plant that maybe just is kind of a little bit aggressive in their garden beds. So that is not necessarily true. Invasive from terms of a scientific standpoint is very specific in definition. So the definition on your screen is the long and definition that is steeped in the bureaucracy of our federal government. So this is NRCS's definition of an invasive plant. So it has to be both non-native and able to establish on many sites, grow quickly, and spread to the point of disturbing plant communities or ecosystems. So there's other caveats to that as well. But so it is really important that it not be from here and that it kind of takes over and displaces our native ecosystem. So out of place and out of control. It's kind of the most simple way to describe what an invasive plant is.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Joel Firem with Firem Forestry Consulting. And continuing on, we have a question, can a native plant be invasive? And sometimes this can be a little bit tricky, but technically a native plant isn't going to be invasive, but it's going to have some opportunistic qualities. So these plants may be able to take advantage of disturbance of soil or existing vegetation to spread quickly and outcompete other plants that you may have around that are desired. And the key there is they have aggressive growth tendencies. Also, we use that word weed quite a bit. Weeds are, really is a plant that you don't like. I may like it, but maybe it's something you don't desire and you're going to call it a weed. But in general, a weed is a plant, it could be native or non-native, that is not valued in the place where it's growing. And the plant poses a major threat to agriculture or other natural ecosystems within the United States. And finally, we have noxious weeds, and these are a little bit more troublesome. And this can be any plant that directly or indirectly injures or causes damage to crops, livestock, poultry, any other agricultural interest there, navigable waterways, any other natural resources. Some examples of that might be wild parsnip, Canada thistle, giant hogweed, things like that. And also, we have a couple examples here that are native plants, but they have that aggressive, opportunistic quality about them. And I'm sure you've seen really dense patches of poison ivy out there, as well as in the woodlands. You got your grapevine tangles that may just go on for acres and acres. And also here we have a list of invasive plants according to the Ohio Department of Agriculture. And until 2018, these weren't defined. And as you can see, a lot of these, and you'll see in our presentation, a lot of these plants are ornamentals. And these were sold regularly, from nurseries and suppliers. But now these listed here, you cannot, with a couple exceptions there at the end. And according to the Ohio Department of Agriculture, no person shall sell, offer to sell, propagate, distribute, or import, or intentionally cause dissemination of any invasive plant in the state of Ohio. So we've got a little help now out there that some of these plants can't be sold out there and further hurt our efforts here in trying to get rid of these invasive plants.
Okay, Gail, do we have any questions on the first part, this first little invasive 101?
So the first question was, will we be able to download the slides?
I can't see why we wouldn't be able to make them available.
Okay, so I said I believe so, and they would be coming through in the follow-up email with additional resources and the survey, as long as that would be okay with you guys. So
it's fine with me.
Okay, thanks.
All right, any other questions?
Will you be showing pictures of the invasive plants?
Oh yeah, get ready for it. It's about to hit you. Okay, so if that is it, we will move on to this next section. We're just going to work on our ID here of some of these plants. They're shown in multiple conditions, hopefully multiple seasons, and we're really trying to focus in on the parts of it that really help you identify the key identifying features. And I mean, this is the best we could do. Outside of going on a hike through the woods, this is a pretty good substitute. Okay. So we are going to focus specifically on 11 plants. If we went over every invasive plant, we would be here till morning, and I could talk about them till morning, but we don't need to put anybody through that. So we're going to focus on 11 invasives, and they're woody invasives, and kind of how you can identify them. And then later on, we will focus on how you can get rid of them as well. So,
hey, Natalie.
Yes.
John wanted to know if you'd be able to put this in a full screen slide view.
I don't know if I can. Let's see. I was not designed in a full screen slide view, so it wouldn't actually display well in a full screen slide view.
Okay, well, thanks.
Yes. I had to design this I think the program I was using couldn't do full screen anyway. So when I originally designed it, it did not work. So, all right. So we're going to start with glossy buckthorn, Frangula ulmus. So this plant was this should look familiar to many of you, particularly if you live in a place where maybe you had a woodland timbered, there's disturbed areas, roadsides. I live in Geauga County. I work in Lake County, but I live in Geauga County, and I grew up as a kid. These lined our driveway growing up. We didn't plant them. The birds planted them because this is considered a bird dispersed invasive. And you may be wondering, how did it get here? This was actually introduced as an ornamental. This is a common hedge plant over in Europe. So when they moved over here, they planted the plants that were familiar to them. And so this was planted as a hedge plant here. Because it does have these fleshy blue-black berries, kind of reddish black berries, I guess, it is bird dispersed. So the birds eat them, it passes through their digestive systems. Birds can travel many miles. And then those seeds are then deposited elsewhere. So you may say, oh, well, I have this growing on my property, but I never see it spread. That's because the birds just aren't dropping these seeds on your property. So a lot of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, they are bird dispersed invasives. So this is glossy buckthorn, and I'm going to give you some tips on how to identify this one. So one is these blue-black berries. Very, very distinctive. They will kind of be mixed in with red ones. But when they are ripe, they are black. It has these smooth oval shaped leaves. They're a little bit glossy, hence the common name glossy buckthorn. One of the things that I really use to identify this one, particularly in wintertime when we probably don't have berries anymore and we don't have leaves anymore, is this terminal bud. There aren't really a lot of terminal buds of our native plants here that look anything like this. So it's kind of a light brown, like a tannish color. It's a little fuzzy. And it's kind of a little bit, when I was in grad school, this was when I took a flora class in grad school, it was described as it's kind of frilly looking. So that's one of the key identifying features for me, is that frilly looking lighter brown tannish bud that's a little bit fuzzy. The stem, as well as the twigs, they have these tiny little white, what are called lenticels on them. So those little white dots all over them, they actually help the plant with respiration. And our native cherries have them as well, and that would probably be the most common native look-alike for glossy buckthorn, would be our native cherries, but the terminal buds are going to be different. Our native cherry terminal bud does not look like that. Another way that I use to identify it is actually the smell of the twig. So if you can rip a tiny twig or cut a tiny twig off and give it a smell, it's very pungent smelling. I think it smells pretty terrible. Some people don't think it smells that bad, but I'm not one of those people. It has a really, really distinctive smell. Okay, so these are kind of our individual parts of the plant, but let's see what it looks like when you actually have a full-blown buckthorn infestation. So it forms these really big, dense thickets. It definitely displaces native plants, and it grows in drier areas, it grows in wetter areas. It really likes those edges and those disturbed spaces. So those edges are like, they have just enough sun. You won't find this in a deep, dark forest. You'll find this usually on the edges and in places where you do have a little bit more sunlight. Okay, I'm going to pass it up to Joel for our second one.
Before we do, it's not official designated question time, but just a quick question: if buckthorn berries are edible for humans?
No.
I don't believe so.
Actually, I learned that everything is edible. It just might kill you, but
yeah, everything's edible at least once, but not recommended.
Anyway, Joel might be able to talk more about that. He said no, the big no.
No, that's it. I agree. Big negative. Okay, moving on. So we have Japanese and common barberry. And these pictures are kind of a good example right from the get-go. We kind of mentioned already, a lot of these are ornamentals, and there on the left we have some examples as a hedgerow, and that's where a lot of these start from. Maybe good intention in your yard, but soon spread into your surrounding yard, into your woodland, and other habitats you may have. But starting with Japanese barberry. It's a native to Asia, and it was first introduced into the United States in 1864. It invades a variety of habitats, from shaded woodlands to open woodlands and wetlands. Japanese barberry spreads by birds that eat the berries. It is widely planted for landscapes and hedges. Birds and small mammals spread the seeds by consuming the fruit on it. And Japanese barberry is avoided by deer in general, and this gives that shrub a competitive edge against other native plants that may be in the surrounding habitat. And these barberry infestations harbor mice that can carry deer ticks, thus leading to increase in Lyme disease infections. Some ID characteristics for the Japanese barberry is it's a deciduous spiny shrub that can grow 2 to 8 feet high. And the shrub has small oval-shaped leaves that may be tinted green, blue, or red. The bark is brown, deeply grooved, with a spine on each node. And the pictures there show a good example of the pale yellow flowers that hang in an umbrella-shaped cluster, which appear in April through May. And those flowers then develop into bright red berries that mature during the summer through the fall. And you can even find them throughout the winter. Managing some of these infestations of Japanese barberry, smaller plants you could dig out. If you're able to do that, let the plants desiccate or bag them up and put them in the trash. If they're a larger specimen, you can try cutting them late summer into fall, and you'd use a treatment of a 25% glyphosate herbicide on that cut stump. And you could also use a foliar spray in midsummer using a 5% mix of Garlon 4 or glyphosate mixed in water. And with any foliar sprays, you want to add a surfactant which aids in the herbicide's effectiveness. Due to the likelihood of seeds being present in the immediate area, annual monitoring may be needed. With a lot of these invasive plants, it takes time, sometimes several consecutive years to get rid of them. So get that mindset from the get-go, as you may be at it for a while, just depending on what the infestation levels are. Moving on to common barberry, very similar. Its background is it's native to Europe and Asia and was brought to North America in the 1600s. And it has long been used as an herbal remedy for treatment of many complaints. Invades a variety of habitats from shaded woodlands to open fields. Description of it is it's a deciduous shrub and it can reach 13 feet in height. The bark is typically gray, and the mature shrub bark has some ridges in it and plates, and winter branch colors range from brown to yellow to gray. The flowering occurs in May through June, and when the yellow flowers are less than a quarter inch wide and develop in panicles. The berries are red, oblong, and less than a third of an inch long. To try and get rid of this, this barberry, some of the small plants can be dug and pulled out in early spring. If they're larger specimens, again, you could use a foliar spray in midsummer with a 5% mix of Garlon 4 or glyphosate in water. Again, add your surfactants. And you can also control a lot of these woody shrubs in the winter, and this one's no exception. You can control it once the plant starts to go dormant in the fall, winter months, using a 20% mix of Garlon 4 and basil oil, applying it to a cut stump. And here's an example of just kind of the cycle of, we were mentioning earlier, with the ticks, maybe higher populations around some of these barberry plants, just from the mice that are attracted to the cover that the barberry provides.
Okay, here's the next one. This is a favorite in people's yards, particularly in the fall because of its brilliant foliage, red foliage. So this is burning bush, Euonymus elatus. So Up here in Northern Ohio, we don't tend to see this escaped into woodlands quite as frequently as you would see it if you, let's say if in October you were driving, late September, October, you were driving south to Cincinnati and you would look into the woodlands and you'll see there's a nice sea of red in the understory of the forests. So that likely means that up here in Northern Ohio, we will soon be having a similar issue. So this one, it invades forests, open woods, forest edges, pastures. It'll dominate hardwood forests in the shrub layer, like I just mentioned, like we actually can see here in this photo. It kind of is particularly pernicious because it does tolerate both full sun and full shade, and tolerates a wide variety of soil conditions as well. And it's also salt tolerant. So in places like Northeast Ohio, where we tend to get a lot of snow, it definitely has an advantage due to its salt tolerance. It also produces a lot of seeds, and its deer don't really love it that much. So it has a lot of things going for it. And I mean, these are reasons why we wanted these things to be planted in our yards, right? Because they would do great. They look great. They grow fast. They have these beautiful berries but don't they feed the birds? Yes, they do feed the birds, but then that also makes them spread. So some of the ID characteristics for this one are, so one, definitely that bright red foliage in the fall. But something that's really, really distinctive, this is also called winged euonymus, is another one of the common names for it. And that's because its stems have these quirky wings on them. So that's a very, very distinctive identifying feature of them. The younger growth is a lot of times doesn't always have them. The younger growth is also like this very brilliant green color too, so it does stand out quite a bit. So the flowers they're not very conspicuous. I wouldn't say they have very showy flowers. They're kind of a light green in color, and they're kind of clustered. When pollinated and when they produce seed, they do form these red seeds, and they have like kind of a darker seed capsule that kind of like hangs above them. This is a very similar looking species. We do have a native euonymus that is a shrub form. It's called Eastern Wahoo. And they are different. Eastern Wahoo does not have winged stems, and its autumn leaf color is doesn't tend to be such a bright red. It can even be yellow. So fall color is definitely a dead giveaway with this one. Now, if you wanted to get rid of this one, so you can always hand pull this one. This is a pretty good one for hand pulling, especially if they're smaller. If you have something like a spading fork or a weed wrench, there's something called an extractigator. Lake Soil and Water actually has one that you can borrow from us that can use for removing plants that have up to like a 2.5 inch diameter. This is also a good candidate, particularly in the winter time, like Joel was mentioning, for cut stump application of herbicides. And if you were playing, I would always follow your package directions as to the concentration. So this one it can be killed with glyphosate, or what is traditionally, in the industry, Roundup. It can be treated by that. Some invasives are resistant to it, but this one can be treated with it. We definitely recommend stump sprout when you cut stump and then apply to that cut stump, because you use significantly less herbicide that way. But this one can be managed mechanically. You might just have to do a little bit more work to do that.
So I know that I'm breaking the rules by not waiting for the designated question time, but I thought I would just throw in 2 quick questions. So Joel or Natalie, whoever wants to take maybe one and the other, but Megan wanted to know if buckthorn was dioecious. And then Cassie wanted to know if looks like the common barberry is on the list for Ohio invasives, but Japanese is not. And do you know why? Those are the questions.
I am not sure about barberry. Maybe Joel knows. I mean, about not barberry, the buckthorn. I don't. Maybe Joel knows.
Buckthorn, I don't know offhand.
Yeah,
I'd have to look that up.
it's bad no matter which species you have. No matter if they are male and female, it's bad either way. So just get rid of it.
John believes that it is.
Okay.
So
I know we have some knowledgeable people in our audience, so
yeah.
feel free to chime in.
Thank you.
On the chat.
And then the question on the barberry, yes, only the one is on there. And when the Ohio Department of Ag created that list, it's meant to be updated as time goes on. Things could be taken off, or most likely more things are going to be added. So that the other species may be something that ends up on there in the future.
And again, John thinks that maybe it was left off by error, he said. So
Yeah, so if you do look into it, there's actually like this long flow chart of things that like a species of all these criteria that a species has to make that list. And also to make that list, sometimes little concessions do have to be made to industries like the nursery industry. So that's why, for example, calorie pears, which we'll talk about later, are able to be sold until 2023, because it would be a significant economic loss for those industries. So there, of course, with everything in government, there is we do have to balance interests. So that may also be another reason for barberry's absence. Also, there are supposedly sterile versions of barberry. So that could be another reason that they're just assuming that sterile ones are being sold. Although the sterile ones have kind of shown that over time, they are not actually really sterile. So there is, we're always learning with science. You're never done learning.
okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to autumn olive. This one I dislike very much, but it's a deciduous shrub native to Asia. It was introduced to America in 1830 as another ornamental. Surprise there. It was widely encouraged to be planted by natural resource agencies back in the 1940s, 50s, 60s as wildlife improvement plant. The landscape was very different back then, a lot more agricultural and rural. And a lot of these agencies, including Division of Wildlife, encourage these to be planted as cover, as food, seed production for wildlife to eat, etc. However, it didn't go well, and now we're fighting this plant and many others from that. But I see this plant invade a lot of old fields, but also early successional woodlands. It can become very dense, and you can also find it on woodland edges, and it comes in different places a lot if there's a disturbed site, maybe if there's some soil disturbance, things like that. And its kind of major issue is it just competes. It takes up physical space with other native plants that are trying to establish there. So autumn olive, it can grow to 20 feet tall, 30 feet wide. The leaves are elliptical shaped, and it can be distinguished from other shrubs by the shimmery look of its silver scales. Okay, it's got this distinct look in the sunlight, and once you get an eye for it, you can distinguish it pretty well. The flowers are funnel shaped, about a ½ inch long and about nearly a ½ inch wide. New twigs are densely covered with silver white scales and scattered brown scales, becoming scaly brown in the second year and finally changing to a red brown. Branches are sometimes thorny. The fruits are an oval drupe, about a ¼ inch to a ⅓ inch long. They're densely covered in pale scales when they're young, and it ripens into a red fruit in the fall. And the flesh of the fruit is juicy and edible, and it's sweet when ripe. And again, is a big attractant to the birds in the fall, and they help spread it. It's also similar in observance to Russian olive, which is typically a little bit more in the western states, but that's another exotic species that's similar. Managing this, the young plants, if they're small, they could be pulled out early spring when the soil conditions are still damp. And for larger plants, again, a foliar herbicide application with a backpack or any other kind of electric powered sprayer could be used. In midsummer, the 5% mix of Garland 4 or 2,4-D mixed in water. Again, adding your surfactant. And also, like the other ones we've been mentioning, this could be controlled, this time of year as well with the cut stump control method. And one thing I want to mention too, on a lot of these woody plants, if you cut them and don't use any herbicide on that cut stump, they really just come back almost with a vengeance. They have 2 to 3 or 4 times as many stems come back, and it's much more thick. So unless you want to do a lot of cutting all the time and you don't want to waste efforts, I would encourage use herbicide on those cut stumps. And here's just some pictures of some dense areas. You can see it in the woodland understory there on the left, and then a young successional area on the right there.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about one of my most hated plants. At my house, this is one of my worst. So this is privet. There are several different species of privet. None of them are good. So I kind of have the main ones covered here. So privet was, of course, planted as a hedge plant. This was another ornamental that was brought here. They're native to Europe and Asia, and they are bird dispersed, like I think pretty much everyone we've discussed so far. So they do have these fleshy black berries that are appealing to birds. So they are spread that way. They form dense thickets, therefore crowding out other species. And so they very easily escape cultivation. There are several different cultivars. This is a very, very common plant that at least used to be a very, very common plant to be sold in nurseries and garden centers. So they can get to be pretty tall too. They can actually reach about 30 feet in height. I've never seen one that big, but I bet they could get to be that big. They have opposite branching. So if you're a plant ID geek like myself, that's one of the first things you're going to look at is this an opposite branching? And actually a lot of these shrubs are opposite, which is actually the less common thing. So it has these opposite branching pattern. And so the leaves they're kind of like a thicker, more leathery kind of texture. Sometimes they persist a lot longer than other leaves do. I've had some persist into springtime. It's not common, but occasionally it happens. So they are a little bit leathery. The bark does have raised lenticels on it. I don't think I have any good pictures of that, but they're not as distinctive, I would say, as the lenticels on the glossy buckthorn, but they are there. The bark is very, very light gray colored. It kind of can have these spikes on it too, these kind of spurs. I wouldn't necessarily call them thorns. They're more of like a spur that it can get on it too. So it kind of has like the function of a spike. So it does have very fragrant flowers that appear from April to June. And the drupes can contain, each one of these is a drupe, and it can contain 1 to 4 seeds, and they mature from July to March. This time of year, if you are walking, when I walk through the sidewalks of the town I live in, there's a couple of hedges of these, and they still have a lot of their berries on them still. So that actually can be a really good ID feature in the wintertime. So as far as management goes, individual shrubs can be controlled by cutting the plant back to the ground in late summer and doing that cut stump application of glyphosate. Or you can also dig up the root ball. This it doesn't have very fibrous roots. It can have long roots, but not necessarily very fibrous ones. I actually have very sandy soil at my house, and I can pull up really big ones, like just with my hands, actually pretty easily a lot of times. So if you had something like a weed wrench or an extractigator, this is a really great candidate for that. If you're somebody who maybe doesn't want to use herbicide, although herbicide is highly effective. And this is another one, pretty much all of these, if you cut these and you don't treat them with herbicide and you don't remove that root, you're going to just end up with a lot more of them. This plant will also spread if it will form roots wherever it touches the ground, wherever a stem touches the ground. So let's say you pulled it up and threw it back on the ground, it can reroot. I've personally had that happen to me. I speak from experience. So if you are getting rid of this and it does have seeds that are on it, make sure that you're disposing of it right. Otherwise, those seeds are just going to, fall to the ground and form a thicket exactly where you pulled up all of your plants. So another thing to keep in mind. These are very easy to hand pull when they're little too. So if you only have a couple of them, stay on top of it. So I'm going to pass it over to Joel for his favorite.
Okay, yes, this is
Hey, Joel,
Yes,
can I ask another question?
absolutely, go ahead.
Okay, so Christine wants to know, is it true that if we jump back to the autumn olive, if the cardinals that eat a lot of the autumn olive versus native fruits, if they are less successful in reproduction, mating, breeding than the ones that eat native berries and fruits?
Okay, I can't say specifically, but big picture, with a lot of these invasives, there generally may not be providing as much, on a food source level. They might not be as nutritious as some of the native things that may be in the area. And big picture, a lot of these things we're concerned with because they really affect the whole food chain. If you take an acre of woodland, it could be any habitat, meadows or wetlands too, and it's 100% native plants there, that what should be there, that they're providing benefits for the soil, for the insects, the rodents, all the way up to the top predators. Everything's working as it should. But if you have an invasive plant that comes in on that acre and say takes up 50% of the space, then we're going to have a lot different composition there, and that acre isn't going to be as productive and beneficial for the wildlife. So I couldn't speak, specifically for the cardinal, but I would say that, all the native wildlife here are going to do and thrive much better on native food sources.
And I think there was a study that did come out. I don't remember the bird species or the invasive berry, but I do remember that the whatever that bird was eating, that native bird was eating, that the invasive berries did not have the nutritional content that that the native berries had. Like, they were lower in fat, so the birds actually needed to eat more in order, to try and sustain themselves. And in some cases, it did kind of make them a little bit sick. So I don't remember the exact study. If we find it, I can send it out in the in our resources if I can find it.
All right, thank you guys.
Sure. So on to Oriental Bittersweet, and I'll share an image here if you guys are able to see that at all. But this vine can get quite large, and I had an example here, and I find them a lot in Geauga County, in the western part of the county anyway. But that example I showed, it was 45 years old after counting the rings, so it can be quite long-lived. But Oriental Bittersweet was introduced to the United States back in the 1860s from Asia. And you can kind of, just a side note, you guys can kind of see a theme of where a lot of these plants are coming from, either Asia or Europe. And maybe I'll throw out a question, to the group, and maybe you can reply of, why do you think a lot of those plants from those origins are doing well here? So let me know what you think about that. But this vine, it's a perennial vine. It can reach, again, very large sizes. It competes for sunlight with trees and other native vegetation. It strangles stems, trunks, damages limbs and trees from their sheer weight. Almost similar to grapevines, that are sometimes a concern in our woodlands. They're climbing all the way up to the top, and they're trying to reach that sunlight, and they're heavily competing with that tree or shrub that they're growing up. And that center picture there actually is one from a landowner up in Lake County, actually. And it was a site along the Chagrin River, the east branch of the Chagrin River. And it was 40 acres, 40 to 50 acres. And it had several tree species on it in this floodplain area, but the entire understory, as you can see, was all privet, almost 95%, and Oriental bittersweet. That's all that was growing there. It was quite a walk through there, and kind of depressing at the same time. But this vine, it can reach 60 feet long and 10 inches in diameter. The leaves are round with toothed edges, and they're 3 to 4 inches long. The flowers are dioecious, and they bloom in spring and are about a ½ inch wide all along the stem. And those flowers then develop into a yellow skinned fruit with a red center. And you can see that very distinctly in the fall, and it lasts in through the winter. Once the leaves fall off, those berries will stay on there through the late fall and into the winter. The management of these vines is going into that area of infestation and cutting the larger vines first. You're typically going to have large vines up on top, up in the canopy, and lots of younger vines on the woodland floor establishing. So concentrating on getting rid of those big vines first, so they don't provide any more seed production. Again, a cut stump control method can be used. Again, fall through winter would be ideal. And you can cut those vines with chainsaws, bow saws, loppers, whatever you can get your hands on. Soon after cutting, you want to apply that herbicide to the cut stump. You can use Garland 4 mixed in basil oil at a 20% rate. And you can apply that with a squirt bottle, a wash bottle, or a stamper. Now, once you've got all the big vines out of the way, you can concentrate the following year. During the growing season, you can easily identify those plants with the leaves on them once the leaves are on. And you can do a foliar application of Garland 4 or 2,4-D at a 5% rate mixed with water. Again, add that surfactant, and this can be done midsummer. And some small plants can be used, or can be pulled manually as well. One thing I do want to note is, so the Oriental bittersweet is non-native, but we also have a native American bittersweet, and you can see the two side by side there. And during the growing months, the leaves and the vines look very, very similar. And the best way that I've been able to identify them is in the fall, once you see the seeds on them. You can see the Oriental bittersweet on the left, the flowers then turning into fruit go all the way up the stem. And the American bittersweet on the right, the fruits just end up being on the tips of those stems. And when you find a Native American bittersweet, it's usually by itself. It's not sprawling all over the landscape, which Oriental bittersweet tends to do. I've only seen a few American bittersweet, and they're probably uncommon to find, but they are out there.
Okay, now on to some bush honeysuckles. So there are several species of bush honeysuckles. We do have native honeysuckles, but they actually, native bush honeysuckles, but they actually are a different genus. So we're talking about Alana Saramaki, Tartarica, and Moro's honeysuckle is the last one. So so we have Moro's honeysuckle, Tatarian honeysuckle, and we have Amur honeysuckle. So all of these have the ability to be invasive. They grow quickly. They prefer full sunlight, and those edges, those disturbed areas, and those edges with good amount of sunlight. These were absolutely 100% planted because they are pretty and they smell nice. My house has a lot of them because we talked to our neighbor, and our neighbor used to be my house used to be a summer cottage actually. And her father, she's a longtime resident here, and her father actually used to be the caretaker of that cottage. And she goes, "Oh, he just planted honeysuckles all over that place. I'm so happy they're still there." And I'm like, "Oh no." So that's why I'm pulling them out everywhere. So yeah, they were planted because they were pretty, another ornamental. So different species will tend to be found in different places. So like Moro's honeysuckle has a higher tolerance for moist soil. And so you might actually find that one in a wetland habitat. But a lot of these, they're pretty generals. They're generalists. They will kind of grow just about anywhere. They invade open woodlands, old fields, disturbed sites. They spread rapidly because they are bird dispersed. We'll show you those berries in a moment. And this plant is a native of Eastern Asia. So this is another Asian transplant. And it was first introduced in North America really early as an ornamental. It was actually introduced in 1752. So this was before we were a country. Don't worry, bush honeysuckles were here. It can form really large stands that prevent native shrubs and understory plants from growing. The fruits will persist on the branches into winter, and that's when the birds tend to feed on them. These are also a plant that is, honeysuckles are usually one of the first plants to leaf out in springtime. So that can work to your advantage for identifying them because they will have these little light green leaves long before anything else will. Privet will also have leaves pretty early too. That's another thing about a lot of these invasive shrubs is that they do leaf out before our native ones. So if you're like, I'm not sure if that's native or not, if it's leafing out before literally anything else, it's probably an invasive. So these shrubs only need to be about 3 to 5 years before they bear fruit. So they bear fruit for a long time. They can get to be very tall. And about like 20 feet tall, in fact. So for managing this one, you're going to want to not plant them to begin with, no matter how pretty they are and how nice they smell. Smaller plants can be managed by hand pulling or digging. Larger infestations are most efficiently treated using an herbicide. So like we've mentioned before, cut stump application, foliar spray, when they have leaves in the summertime. And you can also do basal bark treatment as well to treat this one. Let's show you a couple more pictures here. So here are some pictures of the fruit. So the fruit can range from kind of a very rich red to a lighter red to an orange. And birds love all of them. They do not discriminate. And then there's also, this is kind of what a big thicket would look like. They get to be tall. And if you've ever seen a huge honeysuckle, like they're essentially like a tree, they have this very peely furrowed bark. So they don't really look like much else in the forest. They're definitely, they almost looks otherworldly when you're walking through an area that has like a lot of really big established honeysuckles.
Okay, tree of heaven. This tree is quite a problem in South and Southeast Ohio. I've seen it in Portage County quite a bit along their bike path down there. So it is here and there, but it's native to Northeast and Central China, and it was brought over in the 1700s. It's a fast-growing ornamental shade tree, and it began to lose its favor and desire because it was very weedy in nature. It spreads prolifically from its rhizome roots, and it generally has a foul odor about it. It can grow in thick stands and pushes out native plants along woodland edges and young successional or disturbed sites. It has pinnately compound leaves with alternate twigs. The leaves can be 1 to 4 feet long, so very large, very tropical looking. And it can be confused with some other native species around here. Black walnut looks very close, maybe even some of the locusts. But one distinction is, one, that very large leaf, but two, at the base of the leaflet, there's a little V, kind of a little check mark V at that base, and that's a dead giveaway for identifying it. The bark is generally smooth and brownish green when they're young, and eventually turns light brown to gray. And the skin sort of resembles the skin of cantaloupe. The broken twigs have a brown, spongy pith. You can see there in that top picture. The whitish flowers are in a cluster at the tip of the stems, and the seeds are 1 to 3 inches long in samaras. And samaras are those on the top or on the right there, those winged fruit. Management, how to get rid of these trees. Small plants can be pulled, but you got to make sure to get the root or it's just going to regrow. Again, you could do a foliar application for a little bit bigger trees. You can do this with a backpack sprayer, any other kind of electric powered pressurized sprayer. This could be done in mid to late summer, a 5% mix of Garland 4 or 2,4-D in water. Larger trees, you could use a hack and squirt method, and we'll go over all these different treatment methods later in the end of the program here. But you can use a hack and squirt method, and what you're doing is making injury in the bark, and you're putting you can put a 20% mix of Garland 4 and basil oil in those injuries, and then it's taken into the roots. And that can be done in fall through winter. And another option would be to just do a cut stump, literally cutting the tree down and then treating the cut stump as we've mentioned before.
And that one's another one that's really important that you treat it if you do cut it, because this one will send up little babies all far away sprouting up from the root systems. So I've seen that in real life.
So it's time for a couple more questions, okay, friends? So Brian wanted to know, is it true that Tree of Heaven can cause respiratory issues if chipped up? And along with that, Christine asked, are Tree of Heaven stands clonal?
Respiratory problems, I'm not sure about. I haven't heard that. But they would be clonal. They're all spreading from the same rhizome root.
Okay, thank you. A couple more things. Lynn from Portage Soil and Water did send us an article about red coloration hues that are from invasives, from birds eating invasives. So that's an interesting study, and that's attached to the chat. And did you want me to go through real quick the advantages to some of the Asian plants, Joel, or were you going to do that later, or should I just blow through the answers? There's like 5.
Go for it. Let's do it now.
Okay. I just didn't want to get too far away from that. So why would they have more of an advantage? Gwen said no predators. Barb said we share climate with much of Asia and Europe. Pam says we're just lucky that way. Jeanette said similar latitude. Christine said invasive plants don't have the insect pest here, and they co-evolved. They don't have the insect pest here they co-evolved with to control them in their native land, so they have an advantage over native plants.
Sure.
Nice
So
work.
We have a very
Yeah.
smart audience.
very
I
good.
know.
Yeah. A plus for all those answers. A lot of these are doing well here. A lot of them, that we've mentioned, they're from Asia, Japan, China, or they're from Europe. And we're at that same latitude. We're not talking about plants from South America or South Africa. We're all those countries on the same latitude, similar climates, similar rainfall. And so they can thrive here, but also added in, they don't have the natural competition or predators to keep things browsing animals to keep them in check as they would in their native region. So yes, great.
And we're not the only ones that deal with it either. So Europe and Asia have a bunch of our plants that cause problems there too. So like our native black cherry is the same kind of problem that, Europe's glossy buckthorn is here. So, we share the love. We all do. I mean, in a world where international trade's been going on for hundreds of years, these things happen.
And Megan just added that tree of heaven can also be the host plant for spotted lanternfly.
Bingo.
Yeah,
Very
so it just goes on and on. Just before it gets lost, I wanted to mention that Mark, he mentioned his honeysuckle seemed to be immune to glyphosate and crossbow, a cocktail of 24D and other stuff. So I guess he's been trying to get rid of those suckers.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, some plants are showing resistance. I mean, in those cases, if you know what you have and you don't have a huge stand of it, you can also continuously try to weaken the plant by just continually cutting it back, but you've really got to stay on top of it. So I don't know, Joel might have some tips as far as chemical controls, more specific chemical controls. Those have
a lot of time you'll see, if you're doing a foliar application, just check your mix rates, make sure they're correct, make sure it's the right time of year, weather conditions are correct. In general, when you use a herbicide foliar application, you want to use it when you're going to have the most bang for the buck. So usually you're trying to spray plants with foliar application, usually during or just after a flowering stage. That's when the plant's the weakest. It's used up a lot of its energy that it had stored up from the previous winter, and it won't have much reserve energy to try and fight that herbicide or regrow. If that's still a problem, try doing a cut stump method, and just get rid of that whole above ground portion of that plant. And like Natalie said too, you can constantly stress it, so it has to force it to regrow. It's a much smaller plant then, and then try another foliar application on that much smaller plant then.
Thanks. You guys are doing a great job. Thank you so much. And so are the participants with all of their questions and information. Thank you guys. Barbara's last comment on the tree of heaven is that the spotted lanternfly is in Pennsylvania, so just be aware of it. It's right next door.
Spotted lanternfly has actually been found here in Ohio. So it crossed the border, crossed the Ohio River. So it has been found here in Ohio. So definitely there's going to be, I'm sure you'll be seeing a lot of information about how to identify it and how to report it. We won't be discussing that in this presentation, but definitely something to note.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to multiflora rose. So if you live in a place that has an old pasture or used to have an old pasture, you're definitely familiar with this one. So multiflora rose, or Rosa multiflora, it forms these really thick impenetrable thickets in pastures, fields, forest edges. Sometimes we will even see it in the forest too, because maybe the forest grew up around it. It displaces native vegetation. It tolerates a wide range of soil conditions. This one is native to Asia, but it was actually introduced to North America in the 1800s, 1866, as rootstock for ornamental roses. But then it was further studied, and it was found that it could be used as a living fence for livestock control, because it was, I don't remember the exact phrase, what is it, like horse high, goat smart, cow tough, I don't remember the exact phrase, but yeah, it'll stop pretty much any livestock that wants to cross it, and that's because it has these thorns that are shaped a lot like a cat's claw. So if you've ever gotten stuck in the thicket of this, you're like, well, how am I getting out of here with my skin intact? So it has these spines. It also, there's a lot of other things about it that do distinguish it from other roses. So it has these fragrant white flowers. It's kind of a climbing rose. If it has something to climb, it will climb it. So it has alternate leaves as well, which I don't know if I have a picture of that one. It does have, rose hips are not very fleshy. They're actually pretty hard. So its fruits are pretty hard, and they mature between July through December. So let's see, show you another picture here. So here's what an infestation of this would actually look like. So I know I've been some places where I've seen it pretty bad, just like this, and this is what it would look like when it was flowering. So this one was planted for livestock control, as well as if you've planted, they used to plant roses with this, and when your top part that maybe was grafted, that's a little bit more tender of a plant, couldn't survive the climate or got a disease and died, this rootstock persisted, and it would sprout from that rootstock. So we kind of got this one in a couple of different ways. This one was also heavily encouraged by government agencies for use as living fencing, because it's a heck of a lot cheaper to grow a bunch of these than it is to install barbed wire fence and have to put that around your farm. So we can kind of thank the farmers from the past for this delightful species. As far as controlling this one, it's best controlled by cutting the plants back to the ground. Use long-handled clippers and maybe some thick kid skin gloves, because this one's a tough one that'll get you. In late summer, you're going to want to do that, and treating the cut ends with your glyphosate, that is your cut stump solution. If a thicket is present, cut all the stems back to the ground with clippers, a chainsaw, a weed eater with a brush blade attachment. That can actually be nice to get some distance between you and this plant that wants to hurt you. And allow the cut stems to resprout, and then you can spray with a ground level 5% solution of glyphosate. To then, kind of cut it back, weaken the plant a little bit before you hit it with your weed killer. Yeah, so that is multiflora rose.
All right, next we have calorie pear, and this is also called Bradford pear, and it was introduced from Asia in the early 1900s. It was and still is, until in Ohio anyway, a couple more years. It's widely planted as an ornamental and a street tree along roadways and cities. It was desired for its very early blooms, very pretty. It was supposed to be sterile, and it ended up not being sterile because there was multiple cultivars developed, and the individual cultivars were sterile, but once the different cultivars crossed, there ended up being viable seed. And the story from there, the wildlife eat the fruit and seed and spread it. But I see this a lot in the concern in old fields, shrublands, and early successional woods. And again, it's just taking up physical space, crowding out desired native plants that we want there. It's a small tree, rarely over 40 feet, alternately arranged fine-tooth leaves that are round or teardropped, very waxy, and the edge has a very distinctive wavy edge to it. The flowers are white, about 3/4 inch long. And the flowers actually don't smell good at all. It smells very rancid. It's a very strong odor. The fruits are tiny, they're hard, they're brownish with a few dots on them. It is a pear, but it's very small. I've heard some people using them for different things to consume them, but it's quite small. You really couldn't do too much with it in general compared to your commercial pears. But the bark can be grayish brown. On the limbs, it's smooth, and on the trunk, it can become deeply fissured. Trying to get rid of this small tree, you can obviously try and pull small ones, making sure to get the root. Larger specimens can be cut down with a chainsaw or handsaw and using a cut stump control method, 20% mix of Garlon 4 mixed in basil oil. And this can be done in the fall through the winter. And if you have, some trees that you can reach with a foliar application, you can do this with a backpack sprayer or similar device with a 5% mix of Garlon 4 or 2,4-D mixed in water. And don't forget your surfactant. The surfactants really help with the very waxy leaves. It helps that herbicide stick to that leaf.
Another thing to note about Callery pear is, while it's planted commonly as an ornamental and was once touted as like the greatest ornamental street tree ever, it's actually incredibly weak with its branching structure. So this is not an uncommon thing to see happen with the Callery pear, is they kind of do self-destruct once they get to a certain age and a strong breeze blows by, and I like to say they almost like implode on themselves. So it's like they're almost taking themselves out. So people will say they're a great tree, and it's like, are they? So another thing to take note of, that if you're having a hard time getting rid of yours because you're attached to it, just think, oh, well, it's probably like half of it's going to fall over in a storm anyway. So I'll just start the process now.
Oh, my favorite.
Okay, so now English ivy. I believe this is our last one that we're going to go over. So English ivy is not considered necessarily invasive by the state of Ohio yet. As somebody who has over 2 acres of it at my house, and I live in the city of Chardon, where it's pretty densely populated, I have a patch of forest in the middle of a lot of houses, and everything is just covered in English ivy. So we're all very familiar with what English ivy looks like. It has these dark green waxy leaves. You can see it's pretty attractive. It climbs along the ground. It spreads along the ground, primarily vegetatively. That's how this predominantly spreads. So it does kind of spread from its one point and spreads outward. It will spread by seed though when it climbs. So here we go. So when it climbs, its leaves can even look different. It takes this different leaf shape when it's fruiting, and it gets these like blue-black berries. And this only happens when you let it go vertically. So something that's really, if you have this at your house and you don't want it to spread, you don't want it to seed, this is if you have a lot of invasives at your house and you have to prioritize what is going to give you a big bang for your buck or not have a lot of energy, like Joel was talking about, targeting those biggest bittersweet vines first because they're the ones casting the most seed. That's kind of the thing we want to do with the English ivy. We want to get it off of our trees. One, because it can smother and take our trees down. It can damage their bark, introducing openings where it can get the tree can get diseased. So we want to keep it off of our trees. So severing those stems close to the ground so that the top part dies off and we keep it on the ground, and maybe mechanically removing it from around the base of your trees. That is like a really easy way that you can at least stop it from spreading elsewhere. It might be spreading within your zone, but at least a bird isn't going to plant it 20 miles away. So that is a kind of an easier thing to do. that's kind of like a first stop there. So it does have these very, very glossy leaves. And as a result of those glossy leaves, it does not take herbicide in very well. So this is one where you definitely need a surfactant. Otherwise, it is not going to stick to these glossy leaves and you just put a bunch of herbicide in the environment for no reason. This is another one that by cutting it back so that its leaves have to resprout, those fresh leaves, one, that plant had to spend a lot of energy to put those leaves out, so it's weaker, and those new leaves may lack that waxy cuticle layer on the outside of the leaf, or it's not quite as mature yet, so it may take in herbicide a little bit better. So that's another tip if you kind of have had a hard time getting rid of this with chemical means. This can also be pulled off the ground. It hurts your wrists after a while, but it can be mechanically managed. You can do frequent mowings to try and deplete its energy that way as well. So there are ways that you can manage this one, but this one can be pretty tricky because it isn't easily managed necessarily by chemical means without like repeated applications. Okay, so Gail, do we have any?
Yeah, there's just a
Here.
few, and for the sake of time, I'm going to talk really fast. Is English ivy a skin irritant?
I know for some people it is. I don't think it is for everybody, but for some people I have heard that it is a skin irritant for some people.
Okay, and John, thank you, Donald. John says it's also a host for the oak wilt as well.
I didn't know that. That's a good thing to know.
Lucy said that there's a virus, rosette virus, that attacks multiflora rose now in this
Yes.
area. It weakens it and eventually kills it off. Yvette wants to know if multiflora rose can be pulled by the roots.
I don't see why not. You could pull it by the roots. The problem with multiflora rose is that you have this shrub with lots of spines on it. So it's hard to get to it to pull the roots. There's no reason why you couldn't pull it out by the roots. You might want to cut the top off first and remove it and then try to hack at the roots. So it's not that it's not an option.
Okay, and Christine wanted to know if you can tell swamp rose, Rosa palustris, from multiflora rose before blooming.
Oh, let me see if I can. There is a defining feature on multiflora rose, and you can kind of see it on this one. Do you guys see these like little, like almost like longer kind of frilly hairs that are on the leaf where the leaf attaches to the stem? That is pretty distinctive to multiflora rose.
Okay. Bernadette wants to know what's the name of the tool for digging up the pest, which we'll probably get into.
Yes, we're going to get into all of our tools in our next segment.
Okay, and then I know that I think you might have mentioned how to get rid of buckthorn, but Gwen just wanted to quickly remind her how to do that.
I actually did forget to do that, but how you get rid of buckthorn is pretty much the same way that you would get rid of a lot of these woody species. So you can mechanically pull if they're small, cut stump application. In fact, with buckthorn, cut stump application is probably your best bet. Yeah, so cut and apply an herbicide. And you can even do that as long as the weather is dry, and especially if you have some dry sunny days like we had today. Today would have been a great day to do cut stump application on some of your woody invasives.
Okay, nice catch, Gwen. Sorry about that. And also the name of the native that's similar to burning bush, wahoo.
Yes, Eastern wahoo.
Okay, that's all for now.
Okay. Now we are going to get into the tools and methods of control, which we've gone over some of these a little bit. We're just going to specifically maybe show you what some of these tools look like and what maybe the process of some of the methods might look like. So here is kind of just an overview of tools of the trade. So if you are somebody who professionally, like Joel is, goes out in the field and manages this on somebody else's woodlands, these are some of the tools that he might have at his disposal. You don't have to have all of these to be able to get rid of invasives on your property though. You can make do with a lot of things that you already probably have. So things like weed wrenches. So there's a few different brands of these. There's the polar bear, the root talon, the uprooter, and at the Lake SWCD office, we have an extractigator, which is the same type of thing. It essentially just uses simple machines, uses pulleys essentially, levers, not pulleys. It uses a lever essentially to reduce the amount of force that it takes to uproot one of these shrubs. PVC applicator, so we'll show you a little picture of that in a bit. Spray bottles or backpack sprayer, chemical resistant gloves, also having a set of cotton gloves. We'll show you what that might be for as well. A lab wash bottle, which is my favorite thing for cut stump application. It works great. Large animal syringe, saws, loppers, pruners, chainsaw, even a drill can be helpful. A Maddox or Pulaski tool, that is another one of my favorites. It is very satisfying to like hack out a big barberry stump with one of those. Make sure you have your personal protective equipment and clothing. If you're using dangerous things like chainsaws or herbicides, it is important to protect yourself. Herbicides, different varieties depending on what you are treating, as well as the environment in which you're treating them. So you want to make sure you're using, for example, aquatic formulas for things if you are near bodies of water. Surfactants, you want to make those chemicals stick. I'm a big proponent of dyeing, putting a dye in your herbicide so you know exactly where you are putting it. And apparently I've surfacted in there twice. It's that important. It needed to be mentioned twice. So first we're going to go over weed wrench. So this is an example of what they tend to look like. So they have a little thing that grabs. So they have something that'll grab it, and then when you pull back on the handle, it essentially is a lever and it will pull it out of the ground for you. This is a more simple kind of method. That one you would probably have to put a little bit more force into. These are great for a homeowner who doesn't have a huge infestation. I will say that these don't tend to work in a professional setting who has somebody who has like a really, really big infestation because they are heavy. So they're a bit to lug around, but they would be great if you have a small infestation and you are not comfortable using herbicides. PVC applicator. So essentially this is PVC pieces that are all screwed together. There's a reservoir to hold your herbicide, and there's a wick at the bottom. So you can cover a lot of ground. If you have 2 or 3 people, one person is cutting your invasives and the other person is going around and dabbing a little herbicide on each of those cut stumps, you could cover a lot of ground with a tool like this. Backpack sprayer, or spray bottles. All of these, just a way to get the herbicide to the plant you're trying to get it on. Chemical resistant gloves. So you put your chemical resistant glove on under and then on top. This tends to work better for herbaceous species. We didn't really talk about any of the species that this setup really works well for, but for something, let's say like an invasive, a hybrid cattail, you could then put your herbicide on that cotton glove and wick up the stem to try and apply it to just the plant you're trying to apply your herbicide to.
Okay, here's an example of wash bottles that we've talked about a few times, and like Natalie said, they're very helpful. They're very precise. Here's just a simple setup that you could use. The bottles themselves are very inexpensive. Here you have another food container that was just adapted to hold the wash bottle full of chemicals. So as you're moving around the property, you're not having any herbicide dripped where you don't want it. And you can see the chemical there has a dye in it, so it's red. And there's also a lot of another color, blue, that's typically used. And this is helpful if you want to add that to your herbicide mix, whether you're doing cut stump or you're doing foliar application. It just helps you, the applicator, visually tell where you've been, and so you don't have to respray things that you've already sprayed, and it also helps you avoid walking through any chemical. Also, another option is using a syringe. And this can be something you might get from like Tractor Supply, some sort of animal syringe. And this is one method you can use to instead of doing a cut stump, you can kind of do an injection almost, where you're making an injury in the woody stem, in this case using a drill, and then you take that herbicide concentration, you put it directly into that hole, and then it absorbs into the roots from there. Again, various tools that you can use if you're cutting or hacking and cutting these invasive plants down. Pretty much anything you get your hands on, chainsaws to hand saws and pole pruners, loppers, anything will work to cause damage to that invasive plant. In general, your equipment and clothing, specifically clothing, whatever chemical you might be using, make sure to wear or to read the labels specifically for that particular product. It's going to vary from product to product, but in general, like we said, you want to be using chemical resistant gloves. A lot of the chemicals require you to wear shoes and socks and long pants, and usually long shirts as well. I've seen a lot of applicators out there. They're in flip-flops and with no socks and t-shirts and shorts, and it's usually not a good scenario for herbicide application. You just increase your chances of getting that chemical where it shouldn't be. So read labels. And again, just a kind of summary of some herbicides that are commonly used. Glyphosate is a non, it doesn't discriminate. It's non-selective. You can use it on grasses and broadleaf plants. And if you're near ponds or streams or wetlands, there are some aquatic safe formulations that are safe for the fish, the invertebrates, etc. And triclopyr, Glypro 2,4-D, clopyralid, these are all broadleaf, a little bit more specific to those plants. And again, you've got some examples of dye and an example of a surfactant type to use.
Okay, so here are some of the quick methods. So we are approaching 7:30. So if you need to jump off, that is fine. This is recorded if you need to watch it later. We will continue the presentation. We pretty much got all of our questions out of the way during the presentation. So we shouldn't really have too many more of those. All right, so as far as methods go, so we've kind of already roughly gone over these. So this is called clip and drip or cut stump application. So you can see here with this larger tree, cut the whole tree down, and then the herbicide was only needed to be applied around that outside layer because that's the part of the tree that's transferring water and nutrients up and down the trunk. So, you know, you didn't have to cover this entire stump with it. Use as little as you need to get the job done. So for smaller things like buckthorn, which this looks like it might be, cut stump, a couple inches above the ground, cover it with your herbicide, whether with your stamper or your squirt bottle. Foliar application or wick application, this is kind of what I was describing before. You can also do it with tongs, which is pretty clever. So this might be for something like cattails or an herbaceous plant that is growing amongst a lot of other plants, and you can't just go to town and spray all of it with the foliar spray with your backpack sprayer because you would be hitting non-target plants. So this can allow you to very specifically target certain plants. Here we go.
All right, here's an example of drill and fill method. We explained that a little bit before, using that syringe to apply herbicide directly into an injury on that woody stem. Also, we mentioned this earlier on the tree of heaven. If you have a larger tree, you can use this on smaller smaller stems as well, but it works really well on larger trees. I've used this on European alder quite regularly. Hack and squirt method, you're using a hatchet or an axe, and you're making injuries all the way, around the circumference of that trunk. And the injury is such that you're not peeling off a chunk of the bark, but you're just making a little pocket. You're leaving that lower part of that injury to that bark still attached, and it creates a little pocket which you can then apply that herbicide into there, and it'll kind of hold it and help it absorb without running off down the trunk.
So we do have a list of resources. You may have seen this picture in a couple of these slides. So if you are like, I am uncertain as to the concentration that I should be using of my herbicide for the specific species that I want to be treating, both of these guides actually do have that information in there. They're definitely written at a level that is a little bit more professional, but they do have a lot of really good information in there. So those are great, and you will be receiving those, as well as all the rest of these links you'll also be receiving. These are great for discovering, is this plant that I have that seems to spread a lot, is it invasive? You could look it up in some of these. Yeah, there's a lot of really good resources that we have listed here. So these are Joel and my contact information. So yeah, you will get all of these in an email after the presentation. So I am going to let Gail jump back in.
Hi.
So yeah, these are our Woodland Wednesday partners. So I'm going to let her talk about that a little bit.
Okay, well, it's just regionally, like Northeast Ohio, we have quite a few soil and water districts and agencies that are helping to support, especially, Division of Forestry and USDA NRCS. So we're just grateful for everyone coming together, and make sure that if you have not made contact with your county soil and water district, make sure you contact them. It's probably best just to give them a call or email, not really stopping in at this moment, but we're here to help you as a clearinghouse of information and all kinds of resources, natural resource related. So make sure you get to know the opportunities that your soil and water provides.
And if we don't have the information, we might know the person who has the information. If nothing else, we can point you in the right direction.
Exactly. So also I want to say thank you, Mandy Orahud, the organizational director for Farm Bureau, was on tonight. She might still be on. Thanks for stopping by, Mandy. They're also a coordinating organization partner of Woodland Wednesdays. And Natalie, what's coming up next?
So the next Woodland Wednesdays will be held on February 17th. It'll be another virtual program, and it'll be a virtual walk through Working Woods, which is an area of the Holden Arboretum where they have, it'll be a tour of their forest management demonstration sites. So you'll get to see what some of these methods to kind of improve the health of your forest look like in person.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. So lots of really cool technology being used too. So jump aboard. We're going to have 3 times as much room for registration. So jump on in and sign up. The follow-up email for all this will be coming probably the next couple days, probably not tonight, but you'll be getting all the information once we get it collaborated. Can you send a link to register? Yes, I will send that information in the follow-up email. Thank you, Tammy. Oh, hi, Tammy. Gwen wanted to say thank you. She's been cutting down buckthorn for a couple of years and plenty to go. She's going to add herbicide to her regimen now. Gail says thank you, very helpful. Thanks. Nice presentation. Thank you guys for your great feedback here. There was a few questions. One is, what is the best kind of respirator masks used with chemical applications?
So it's kind of up to you and what your comfort level is. If it's not going to bother you too much, some chemicals stink a little bit more than others, and it just depends what your sensitivity is. Minimally, if it's going to bother you, you can wear. It's more than just a dust mask. It's kind of a particulate filter mask, but looks similar, has a better seal and a little better filter to it. But there's also cartridge respirators. If it's really going to bother you, they have half mask cartridge respirators that you can interchange the different canisters on them if it's something that's really going to bother you.
Okay. Bernadette wanted to know if there was a certain kind of dye that you add to the herbicide, and does it break down eventually so it doesn't color the ground?
Yes, correct. So these dyes, they're not permanent. They'll eventually fade away. They'll wash off with the rain. They're not harmful to the habitat, surrounding habitat, and they also come out of your clothing in the wash. So they're not a permanent dye.
And they're also formulated to work with herbicides. So like if you went to your kitchen and got some, food coloring, it would not work the same way that an herbicide dye would. So I got a bottle of laser and it's great. And you just need a little bit and it's great. You know exactly where you're putting it.
Okay, awesome. Calda says, thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you for an informative presentation from Brian. Barb, thanks. Nice presentation. Great pictures. Gosh, you guys just really did great. Awesome job. Someone did want to know if Natalie, with her enjoyment for cutting things down, do you do demolition projects?
I will say that for my anniversary, my husband did buy me a real adult big girl chainsaw, gas powered chainsaw, and it's been my favorite gift I've ever received. So
Awesome.
I have enough projects of my own.
Awesome. All right, Jan, thanks. I'm glad you learned a lot, and same, Chris. So let's see, are there any other questions? That was me, by the way, that asked about the demolition, Natalie. We just have some projects at home, so it's good to know. Any other questions? Ooh, Nancy, I have a plant that has green leaves about 2 feet high, spreads, and has a white plume, comes out near the end of summer. What is it? This is like a mystery question.
Have her take a picture, and you could send it to my email, and we can try and identify it.
Yeah, pass it along to one of us, and we can try to identify it. I get lots of pictures of random plants. Just please make sure it's in focus.
Yes.
And don't forget, you guys, as soon as you get the feedback survey, just respond. Don't say, oh, I'll do that later. It's so quick, so easy, the questions, and then you'll have a chance for Joel to come out and look at all of your plants. So that would be a great door prize to win. Okay, Cassie wants to, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, winter creeper management suggestions.
That'd be similar to like English ivy. So it's an ornamental ground cover, but it also can go up trees. And again, that's where it flowers and fruits. So kind of a similar approach, probably doing a cut stump treatment on the vines going up the trees, and a variety of different approaches that we mentioned, maybe using a brush cutter, injuring it, making it regrow, and then maybe a herbicide application after that. It has a very waxy leaf too, and can be very difficult to get rid of. So that would, it might take you a year or two to see some good control on that.
Okay, thanks. Barb did ask if the spotted lanternfly has been seen on Tree of Heaven in Geauga County. Do you know that?
It's only been found, I think, in one county thus far.
Correct.
and it was, what county was it? It was just like Southeast Ohio. Just across the river.
Okay.
Wherever Steubenville is. Why can't I think of what that county is?
Guernsey. No.
Not Guernsey. I can
Okay.
tell you all the people who work at the soil and water there, but I cannot think of
Jefferson.
Jefferson. That's it. Yeah. It
Okay.
was found in Jefferson County.
So yeah, Mary asked, she jumped on a little late. So yes, this will be recorded, or it is recording right now. And you will get a link to the recording if you missed the beginning of the presentation. And it's also going to be on our website. So, all right, I think that now that it's 7:42, we should probably wrap this up. Thank you so much for all of your enthusiasm, great questions, and your attention, and especially your concern for our natural landscapes and making things better. 1 yard at a time. You know, we are spending a lot more time at home in our yards, and what a great project, a New Year's resolution for all of us to try to get rid of some of these wicked weeds. So thanks so much to Joel Firem and Natalie Gertz-Young. Really appreciate your awesome presentation. And we will see you guys next time. So sign up for February's program and we'll see you soon. Happy New
Thank
Year
you.
and thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.